Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to today's BIC Streams session When Real Turns Real Gender Norms and Representation in Media. This is the second of the two-part webinar in collaboration with Project RAISE, an equal community foundation supported by Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies, with a view to talk about gender representation. Project RAISE is a national collaborative of civil society organizations, funding organizations, intermediaries, and government institutions who are committed to the social outcome of raising gender equitable boys. Under this program, partner organizations have access to the knowledge and toolkits that they need to deliver programs, evaluate progress, and drive collective action towards this common outcome. For more information, do visit ecf.org.in. The first panel in this two-part series was Defining Masculinity, Parenting Tips for Raising Gender Equitable Boys, where the immensely thoughtful conversation centered around the role that parents can play to counter patriarchal norms and raise their boys to behave and act in ways that promote gender equality and nonviolence. One of the key pillars of socialization among families, schools, communities, etc., is the media. Media plays a significant role in promoting and perpetuating patriarchal gender norms. With the advent of the internet, social media platforms, streaming platforms, and OTT networks, media has become a pervasive influence in the lives of adolescents. Through this panel discussion, we will understand some of the research and analytical tools available that enable us to gauge the impact of media on boys and notions of masculinity. We will understand the importance of having more diversity in the role models presented in mainstream media and explore the need to move away from heteronormative and hypermasculine representations. On the panel today, we have Rashmi Lamba, filmmaker and India Council lead, Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media; Sridhar Rangayan, filmmaker, writer, and activist; Rajat Mittal, author and creator of Boyish. Our moderator for the session is Sohini Bhattacharya, CEO of Breakthrough India. Full bios of our speakers are on our website for you to look at later. And with that, over to Sohini.
Thank you, Lekha, and thank you, BIC, and everybody else who has made this possible. We have an evening with three very, very interesting speakers. And so, without much ado, let me just kind of, start off on saying, what is this all about? So, in India, mostly, and many other countries across the world, when we talk about gender equality, we talk mostly to and about girls. We forget that boys are a large part of that conversation, and that no work on gender equality can be complete without talking to and about boys. And when I talk about boys and girls, I really talk about them in all their diversity. So, all boys and all girls, all men, all women. We forget that patriarchy, which, as a feminist, we do talk about patriarchy a lot. We forget that patriarchy affects boys as well as girls, right, really. And outmoded concepts of masculinity can make them feel inadequate and keep the power that they have within themselves. The social constructs of the role of boys and young men are as equally formed by sexist environments, including media, rather than only view them as perpetrators when something bad happens outside the context of the patriarchal mores. One test case for this problem was the boys' locker room furor that happened, very recently last year. It was a case of highly irresponsible, but possibly, typical adolescent behavior, which should have been dealt with by parents and school authorities, right then and there. Instead, it led to public voices labeling these children as predators and abusers. There are police FIRs, demands that they be placed in juvenile homes. There was no discussion about how social media or new sexual mores enable the boy's behavior. So we either take a very instrumental approach and we talk about, hegemonic and toxic masculinity, or, we take a very protective approach and we talk about men as protectors and, as heads of families. But, all these aside, socially, for sure, men and boys have more power within the system, right? Now, how do we get them to share that power? With young men from underprivileged backgrounds where I work, the conversation is even more important because there's no time given to acknowledging their stresses, including, sexual frustrations. So nothing is dealt with in a sympathetic or an empathetic manner. And, how influenced are these by internet and social media? We don't even pause to think about that before we start pointing fingers. At Breakthrough, the organization that I work with, we focus on learning. Girls and boys from poor and marginalized backgrounds learn to question hard to shift norms and build a gender equitable view from a very young age. And they learn it within schools, which are institutions that perpetuate gender based discrimination and violence, or they learn it within their communities, which also collectively subscribe to very discriminatory norms. There are literally walls between boys and girls, even in co-education rural schools. And intergender conversations are not encouraged at all. So we build negotiation skills and skills in having intergender and intergenerational conversations on taboo and difficult subjects. We use icons like this 15-year-old girl and boy called Pinky and Pankaj, who are like, we use comic forms of that, animation forms. These are your normal 15-year-olds in a rural area, and we initiate dialogues through them that break stereotypes. One of the things that we find a hindrance is the pathetic lack of role models among boys with gender equitable views. What are they like? What do they do? Are they like you and me? Are they sissies or ninis or dudes? What are they, right? To throw some light on the importance of building up a repertoire of real life stories about people you and I can relate to, I'd love to invite Rajat Mittal, the creator of Boyish, to talk about it today. Boyish is a 12-part essay series that experiences masculinity and the experience of growing up as a boy in India. Rajat, a very, very welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Shoini, for having me. And yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction, as well as um, yeah, I think you summarized what Boyish is pretty concisely and well. Thank you for that.
So, Rajat, my first question to you is why boyish? What are you trying to achieve with these stories?
Yeah, so for why Boyish is a good question and something that I have been struggling with for quite some time before it actually came out, right? Because the idea of doing something for boys was sitting in my head for quite some time. I have been working in the space of gender per se through creative projects for about 7 years now. And my last two published projects were essentially focused on girls, right? So this this question of is there something to be done for boys was always sort of sitting there in my head. And I think I finally, it took me time to really internalize this idea that you very nicely put, that it is patriarchy, or like the concept of patriarchy doesn't necessarily is only hurting a one gender, right? It's sort of like wields equally sometimes, maybe not equally, but it definitely encompasses all genders when it starts to hurt, right? And from that perspective, I think boyish, when I was able to internalize that, I think boyish made a lot of sense, right? Because the reality is, speaking about boys is very tricky in a climate that we are in it's very tricky, right? Because there is unfair privilege and advantage, which is clear at this point. But does that negate the consequences of patriarchy that boys have faced, right? Like, so for me, it was really hard to come to that viewpoint in the beginning. But once some of these pieces fit, it became a little more obvious that this needs to be shared. I will also add that, Boyish, through the 12 stories, it is largely a moment for me to, it's a very personal moment. It's largely a moment for me to reflect on my own upbringing. So I grew up in basically two towns in UP, you know, very small towns. I lived like a lower middle class family, in a lower middle class family. So I, back in the 80s, 90s, right? So like the amount of conditioning that I had, it took me like a lot of time to understand and really see the conditioning that I got, right? I had to like travel to so many cities, meet so many people to really come to that conclusion that there are areas in my own self that I can work upon, right? So Boyish is sort of a personal reflection of sorts as well. And I hope, with these stories, I hope that, folks like myself uh, also get a moment of reflection. Because essentially what these stories do for me is they kind of suspend reality for a bit, right? The whole point of telling these stories is to suspend my version of reality and to like put me in this world where I can give another opinion, another viewpoint a chance, right? So like, can boys be nurses? In my reality, no. But then I present a story which sort of shatters through my reality for me, and gives me a real life person, you know, in my environment like me, who has gone ahead and done that. So I think that really is thought provoking, and like sort of nudges me in sort of the right directions. Uh, yeah, so I hope that's what Boyish accomplishes for its readers.
No, I mean, so we are when we are I work with large number of adolescents, boys and girls equally, and we are struggling to actually get stories about role models, yeah, and so I mean, how can we actually create a wider network for stories like this to be consumed by normal human beings, regular people like you and me, and even for people who do not have access to either English or the internet. How do we really take it out there? you know do you have any plans for that? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think like going beyond the internet is something that I quite often is not that, it's not the first question that comes to my mind, because like I essentially live on the internet at this point. uh, so I consider it a commodity and like sort of omnipresent, but it's not. And thankfully, at least as far as plans for Boyish go, as far as my thinking goes on this question, I'm lucky to have learned from some of my previous projects. So Menstrupedia did this pretty well. It is, it was able, it started off as a book in English, largely consumed by urban educated class of India. And over a span of 5 to 6 years, we were able to, take it to vernacular languages. We were able to sort of uh, build up sustainable models through which we can distribute it pan India, right? And in tier three, tier four towns, all sorts of places. Uh, I'm hoping I can replicate that model again with Boyish. So in Boyish, especially, like, I have a passion for making children's books. So I do envision children's books will be coming out soon. And that is one of, in in my opinion, one of the very strong mediums through which we can tackle the non-internet areas. Uh, the beauty of books is that they provide you a level of privacy and intimacy. So they really give you moments where you are left with the book and you are not under the influence of someone else. So you can really form your own opinion whether the book is for you or not, whether that point of view is for you or not. And I think if that sticks, it sticks. Then there's no going back from that moment of clarity or from that moment of ownership. Uh, so yeah, I think that's one way I hope some of this work can transcend to uh, areas which don't have internet necessarily. Uh, yeah. Was there a second part to your question?
No, no, this was it, and I was thinking how lovely, how well the boyish stories would actually lend themselves to animation,
Mhm.
animation or even comic books, or, we used to have those flip books when we were young. What were they called? You just flip through and the stories came to life, There's so
Mhm.
many possibilities, actually.
Mhm.
You talked a little bit, Rajat, about your personal passion, why you want to do this. Is there more to it? Do you want to, our audience, I'm sure, would love to understand a little bit more about who you are, and why do you do this work a little bit more. Is there something that you'd love to, talk about?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would love to share more about myself. So, uh, if you look at my background, it's very sort of typical in a way, like lower middle class upbringing, went into engineering, uh, built a career in tech, in the world of tech. Um, for me, actually, I got the start on creative projects in the space of gender personally through essentially a sabbatical I was taking, and Menstrupedia sort of came to my desk. Uh, I started as someone who was personally very skeptical of the idea of making a comic book which teaches puberty and menstruation to young girls. Uh, but I think like Menstrupedia, what it really did for me was it really gave me that schooling which I had missed. Right, it really gave me an environment to unlearn a lot of things that I had picked up. And by the way, when it came to my desk, I was 27 years old. So that's 27 years old of, very classic upbringing in mostly towns of UP, some parts of Gujarat. Uh, so you can imagine the amount of conditioning I had, right, at that point. I had very strict views about what gender allows, right, me or for that matter, others. Uh, so working on a project as a male, which is about female menstruation and puberty, uh, was really just full of personal experiences, first and foremost, right? Like uh, I lost friends, got pushback from all sorts of places. Uh, but in the end, it worked out really well because I think I'm very excited and thrilled to to be here because it's such an exciting space for me. I just see a huge amount or huge body of work that uh, remains to be done. You know, so that aspect is definitely exciting as well. And I'll sort of circle back to Boyish now, which is Boyish is truly a very vulnerable project for me because I do try to really look within and uh, areas of my life that I was not necessarily proud of, I was sort of ashamed of, you know. Boyish is my first moment where I've tried to like say all those things out loud, you know. I love this quote that, shame shrivels when you speak it out loud. And that's exactly what it's doing for me. Uh, as I write these issues where I share things that I have maybe participated in, or I have been uh, I have been addressed to, I have faced. I'm hearing back from so many readers that they did the same mistakes or they had the same moments in their life. Uh, so that's really encouraging in a way, because it really gives me confidence that there's more work here to be done. Uh, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I understand it's a work of love,
Yes.
and so that gives it, that kind of a impetus actually.
Yeah.
So we're going to gravitate towards talking a little bit about films, Rajat. And so my last question to you before I invite our other speakers to come on board is to what's your earliest, strongest memory or impression of of any kind of film that you had seen, around gender norms or gender identity? Anything that comes to mind that you really felt strongly about?
uh, I'm trying to think of one that I can come up with that I maybe saw in my childhood. So something as early as that, but it really doesn't come one to me. The one that comes to my mind is this movie called Udan. I think it's more of a new age movie, but the reality is, even Udan is about, I think, 10 to 12 years old at this point. You know, and what the movie did for me, it really was able to capture ways in which we rear boys into men. Uh, I will say that I'm lucky to have a more loving father than what's represented in the movie. But still, I think, like, for a lot of boys, that movie struck home because it just had some moments where you could really see yourself in the mirror. Um, and it shows that how these norms can be hurtful to boys, right? Um, that's one thing I often come back to is, and as you originally mentioned, when we talk about gender, when we talk about patriarchy, one of the unfortunate things that has happened is that a lot of boys tend to think that they are the perpetuators, or they are the sort of soldiers and providers. There's sort of, they don't see themselves in the middle. They don't see they can participate in this conversation. They often feel it's exclusionary, right? So I think movies like Udan, or like other work in this area, really is trying to break that bubble of in their mind, that these are ideas that are hurting them as much as they're hurting other genders. And I do hope, like, that's how we are able to bring them, at least in this conversation.
No, thank you, Rajat, and that helps me segue right into my next speaker, Rashmi Lamba. Um, Rashmi, my favorite grouse against mainstream films and culture is that um, it's a huge source of socialization. In the image of men generally portrayed there, but either they're paragons of virtue, protector of women, protector of families, they're the umbrella over everyone's head, super dad, super son, super leader of other men, or they're really bad. They're like that, the poster that came, huge big muscles beating everyone up, but they're always in control. They're men who are really in control. So I think what is heartening is that in many films, in many TV shows, they have begun to deconstruct and show men who are vulnerable and show how patriarchal norms are reinforced and exalted, but not enough. So, just to tell you all that Rashmi is the India Council lead for Gina Davis Institute for media, for gender in media, and I came across the organization only last year to tell us about a little bit of findings of their research on representations of masculinity in television meant for boys. Right. So, Rashmi, welcome, and over to you for that.
Thanks, Sohini, and it's really wonderful to be here with everyone and with Sridhar and meeting Rajat. So thank you for this. So I too actually, we'll possibly, I think, go to how I came into this space later. But I think with the Gina Davis Institute, I too was following them, and then I got an opportunity to interact with them very closely in 2015 when I was given the opportunity to actually start a film festival for the FICCI ladies organization. FICCI, as we know, is the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and they have a ladies organization. And what impressed me was the mantra that they have with Gina Davis, the actress, who's really a well-known Hollywood actress, and I think they're celebrating 30 years of Thelma and Louise, which is her most iconic film. So apparently, when her children were growing up, this is what disturbed her, that exactly what you said, that the representation on television was not a gender equity or equitable representation. So she came up with the mantra that if she can see it, she can be it, the role models that you're talking about. And of course, what she also came up with, if you go to their website, and it's, as I said, it's not the Gina Davis website, it's called See Jane, SEEJANE, because she's talking about See Jane, right? So why are we seeing so much of Jack, and why are we not seeing so much of Jane, is what she said. And but then what she realized very quickly was the fact that, like you said, everybody will say, but yeah, we're doing it, ho to raha hai, dekho humne queen banai, humne ye kiya, wo kiya, Mangal mission, we've done this. So unless you come up with the data and actually facts and figures, you cannot bring about the change. And that's then how she set up the Gina Davis Institute for on Gender in Media, and they are housed in the St. Mary's College, and they actually, all their research is done with the School of Engineering at the USC, and the tech team that is led by, a gentleman with Google. They work very closely. So it's all very AI driven, and human coding is done and stuff like that. So that impressed me too a lot. And that's when we approached them about this whole thing, to do a gender symposium alongside our festival. And that's what was done. We did a symposium in Mumbai. But coming to what they've just done very recently is what they've done with Promundo and the Caring Foundation, is a study on masculinity depiction in children's television. And again, on the website, you can see a lot of the facts and figures, which I won't go into detail about that.
Right, right.
But what was very interesting is that there, instead of saying if she can see it, she can be it, what they said is if he can see it, will he be it? And I thought that was a very, telling remark that they came up
Yes.
with. So, in fact, so they've done a lot of the facts and figures of how much television is consumed by the tweens and how much is consumed by the younger and the older generation. And in fact, I think as we speak, they are actually, they've just, I think, last week put up a study that they finished on gaming, because what they found is that, the amount of gaming has just escalated, especially in the past year, because that's what boys are doing. And as you said, it's also a way for everyone to socialize. But then again, they've done the representation in online gaming. But what is interesting, when I was, just also reading a bit on the notes of what you were saying, is the depiction is showing, as you said, two extremes. But what is the solution for the content creators? Because, okay, here's the data. We've said this is the problem, this is the data. But are we coming up with the answer? Not the answer, but recommendations, So they've got recommendations for content creators, where
Okay.
they've made points like, of course, we've said, commit to inclusive storytelling, avoid the common stereotypes, etc. Show boys, as you said, being vulnerable, asking for help, and avoid stereotypes about parenting,
Mhm.
the male parenting, and uh, show them, and because it reinforces. But what is interesting, and I don't know if that's an answer I should give now or later is about the tools that they've developed. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
should I talk about that now, or would
Yeah,
you
that
like
was
to
my
say
next
something?
question because
Okay,
I
so I
believe
don't know
that
if
the
you'd like to
institute,
frame
yeah,
that.
has,
Yeah. So
yeah. So I was thinking, that would be my next question to you about how the institute has developed these interesting tools,
yeah,
which are like the Bechdel test for media
yeah,
professionals to gauge levels of diversity and inclusion
yeah.
in their work. How much of that should be there? So could you just tell us a little bit because that's super, super interesting.
So yeah, so they are. So Bechtel, of course, is the common one, but again, Bechtel is telling you what the problem is, right?
Okay.
So what they've said is that it's a ground. So they've called it the first tool, and we launched it in India. Actually, they came up in 2015 with that tool. It's called the Gina Davis Inclusion Quotient Tool, and India was one of the first places actually where it was announced because we had our festival in February 2016, and the CEO and the Dr. Caroline Hellman, who's now also the executive director of the Representation Project. In Hollywood, they've got the Representation Project, where they talk about the mosque you live in and all those films. So she was the key person also who worked with the Google. With Google, it was funded by Google. So the tool is actually what they're saying is it's a groundbreaking research tool that is comprised of a hybrid methodology that leverages machine learning to analyze audio and video media content, and they've used that also to do the studies that they do, because to analyze so many thousands of films, they can do it much faster than the human mind, right, or the human eye or the human ear. And so this was a collaboration with the University of Southern California Signal Analysis Interpretation, and it's the only software that can actually measure speaking time. So, pretty much like what Facebook does when you can tag people. So on the website, you can see the little film that they have. So they actually tag people. So in the film, what they can do is they show a demo. If you go to the website, they show a demo that because this extends across all six gender representations, which is your gender, race, LGBTQIA, plus disabilities, ageism, body size, and now they've also included skin tone. So they tag, and for example, if there's a crowd scene,
Right,
they will even tag how many extras, as we call them in our parlance,
right.
are males, how many ageism, how much this, blah, blah, blah. So they do that with the GDI inclusion quotient tool. And there's a lot more about it on the website. But the other one that was launched just in 2019, we're in 21, in 19, Gina Davis was actually invited by, the really progressive prime minister we have of New Zealand, right? The lady. So she launched it there. It's called Spell Check for Bias.
Okay.
Because what they said is, why come up with a solution once the film is made?
Right,
Why not analyze it at script stage itself, right?
right,
But what they're saying is, we're not telling you how to tell your story. We're not telling you, we're not hampering your creativity at all. We're not interfering in your theme. It can be horror, it can be whatever, it doesn't matter. But what they're doing, again, using the same technology, AI based, with the same partners, funded by Google, with USC and SAIL, it analyzes the film and television scripts, manuscripts, advertising briefs for a commercial, to create a breakdown of characters and dialogue. So again, with the six identities, and then what they do is they provide an analysis of the tropes and stereotypes, right? And such as whatever racial injustice, violence, discrimination, and intelligence. And then one more thing that they do, which I heard a very interesting presentation by the CEO, because she was trying to make the presentation to a lot of people in India as well. So we were talking to filmmakers and the producers guild, etc., etc. Is that they also find a lot of characters who do not have yet a gender assigned to them. So they can work with you saying, look, if you have, as Rajat said, a nurse, does it have to be a female nurse? Can it be a male nurse? Or can it be someone with disability? Can it be LGBTQIA? Can it be ageist? Whatever. And also now, of course, with the buzzword being BIPOC, which is the buzzword, I think, in the Western world now, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? So, what they then work with you is that, hey, why don't you, or even in the STEM roles, can we see more varied people? So that's how they create the role models. So these are the two tools, and Disney and Universal have now both got a contract with them, with the Gina Davis Institute, that they will put all scripts through the spell check for bias test. And it has actually resulted in, again, facts and figures available on the website, to change scripts around. And I think they're now claiming that in the West, they actually, in Hollywood, they have to a great extent achieved gender parity in children's television and family films of a certain, whatever, they work with Nielsen, and they work with, again, and the rating is done. So that's really what they're doing, and they're developing. I was reading up on what they're developing, another analysis tool for gaming, because they're working on that right now. So they will come up with an analysis tool for that as well.
Yeah, you see more, interesting Disney characters like Moana and others who are, indigenous people and all of
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, all of this is happening globally. Rashmi, do you see things shifting in India, given this whole global discourse on sex and gender and all of that?
I
What kind
know.
of
I
shifts are
think
we
I
seeing?
know. I think Sridhar is also nodding his head. I think because that's exactly what we're trying to do. And I think one small step has been taken by Anupma Chopra, who's done Oh Womania, the study that they've done with Koro and things like that. So, but I must confess that when over the last 2 years, we've been trying to approach a lot of people with these tools, saying, look, we're not influencing you at all, we're just helping you analyze it. And the question you get back is all about the commercial that, so it's more, I would say, it's about actually changing a paradigm shift in the audience mindset, which will come back to exactly what both you and Rajat are saying, and I'm sure Sridhar will add to it, is that if there's more dialogue, we will be able to then have better audience mindsets. And so living in India, and I think I'm sure all of you all have heard, I do volunteer with MAVA, which is Men Against Violence and Abuse, who have the traveling festival, which I think even Sridhar does. And it's fabulous, the sessions we have after each screening. And now, over the last year, we've done about 4 or 5 film workshops based. So, for example, we did one with a short film. It's called Nutcut, if you've heard of that, which I think just got released this week on Voot. And that's got Vidya Balan, who brings up a little son in a patriarchal family, and how she uses storytelling. She tells him the story of a king and a parrot, and how she uses the storytelling without, and she leaves it to the child's imagination and his decision making on how he should change, because he's being influenced by what we say bade bhaiya. The bade bhaiya are doing, so he also wants to be macho like bade bhaiya, and the bade bhaiya uses him to go and do certain things. So it's a short film, because I think a lot of the millennials don't want to watch 2-hour films. So these are the 24-minute, 28-minute, and it's been written by a young filmmaker, Anukampa Harsh. I think Sridhar knows her, and directed by, again, young filmmakers. So I think the change, as you said, but my question, coming back to, I would put the question out there to the audience and to all of you all, is, these are films that you have to look for. It's not mainstream, right? So that's the
True.
feedback we get even at the sessions we have, when they're curated films like what Sridhar does and what Mawa does. The youngsters will always say, but ma'am, we have never seen these, we've never heard of them, we have to go look for them. I hope it's changed a bit with the online, now OTT
OTT
platforms.
platforms, yeah.
But even in the OTT platforms, we have to lure them away from the other stuff that's online, right? I was just to end this little one is that I was once very fortunate to listen to a sort of talk being given by Michael Moore. He was talking about the power of documentary because his documentaries are so powerful. But he said that you have to make your documentary like a mainstream film because you have to lure your audience away on a date night uh, from watching Star Wars, which okay is a great one, okay, but any other film, you know. So in India, we have no funding for documentary. We have no funding for these kind of films. So you know, in fact, I think I once was with another filmmaker who's made some wonderful films, a national award-winning film, and we were watching a film and his documentary, and the people came up and said, "Oh, sir, your film was so interesting. It didn't feel like a documentary," you know, which meant that the documentaries are so boring. कि उसको ये आपकी documentary, it was not like a documentary. So that's the sad part. But I think there's hope. I'm very hopeful. I'm
Yeah.
very optimistic with what's being done now, and especially in the short film space, I think. And that's why the Gina Davis Institute also just finished a study with UNICEF and with the Indian Advertising Association on commercials. They've just done a huge study on commercials and advertising in India with Plan International, UNICEF, and with the advertising community. So, because what their basis was that you cannot choose the ads you see. You can choose the films you see, you can choose what your programs, but you don't know what commercials are going to come with those. So
Yes.
you cannot change that. So that's why they've done a lot of work, and they again put up the facts and figures on the website. That was done just 3 months ago. They launched that study. I mean, they came out with the results of that study. So I hope the data can change mindsets.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the ads, on the point of ads, I've today, in fact, just had a response from ASCII about an ad that I really thought was obnoxious. Not the product, but the placing of the product and the ad. And I raised a stink with many of my friends from the
Okay, wow.
fraternity. Today I've heard about that has been taken down from Instagram, but
Really?
well, yeah. So I don't know, how much of that is fine and whether they'll bring it
Right.
back. But that's true.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much, Rashmi. That was fabulous. My I would actually live to see Pankaj Tripathi as really this vulnerable man, play this vulnerable man someday, or Prakash Raj, playing
Right.
that kind of role at someday. So one of the things that we always discuss, with friends and colleagues is that um, how can we bring in intersectionality into this whole thing, gender and identities and concepts of masculinity, femininity. How do we understand the different forms and systems of inequalities that are experienced in different ways by different women and girls and gender diverse people, and that these experiences are rooted in systems and structures of power, even within this whole group of men. There are even men who are actually not in power, right? So how do we link this whole heteronormative hegemonic masculinity that we talk about all the time, and how it affects girls and boys? How do we then link it back to other kinds of relationships, other kinds of families, other kinds of identities? So, and boys and men have to navigate fears of rejection, social stigma, legal repercussions constantly. What kind of pressures do they create for boys, eh? So I'd love to, kind of bring Sridhar into the conversation at this point of time. Sridhar Rangayan, as you all know, is an activist, a filmmaker, and has made films with special focus on queer subjects. So, Sridhar, welcome to the panel.
Yeah, thank you.
I, so, Sridhar, I would, like to start with the question I asked Rajat. So, what was your earliest, strongest impression from media, film, all of that around gender norms or gender identity? And then let
Yeah,
you
sure.
talk.
Before I go into that, I just want to point out some of the things which just what's a bit bothersome in the beginning of this panel. I just want to make sure that like I put it on the table. So you basically kind of when you introduce a panel and everything, you just mentioned boys and girls, men and women. they didn't include anything beyond that particular binary. For me, I'm placing the thing on the table because I basically work with the non-binaries.
Right.
That's one thing. And also, when you mention like we normal people, that for me was a big problem. You can say we privileged people, which is fine. We are privileged. But we normal people, I know you didn't mean it that way, but I just want
Right.
to put it on the table because I just felt a bit concerned when I heard these two terminologies right at the beginning of the panel.
Okay.
So I'm sorry to bring it up, but I just want to put it on the table, just make sure that like everything is clear.
Okay. No,
So
I did say girls and boys and men and women in all their diversities.
yeah.
Yeah. So that covers entire range of
Yeah. So
all
the
of
thing
that.
is, like, I mean, for me, like always, like, I mean, in India, primarily the people who do not follow any of these constructed binaries are the people who are left behind, and that's the people I'm focused on. So not necessarily I'm a gay man, I'm cisgender gay man, but still, for me, the worrisome factor is basically the lack of focus on transgender persons and non-binary persons and trans men and the whole spectrum of LGBTQIA plus. So for my earlier memories of my film thing, if you just want to ask me, I used to see a lot of mainstream films with my mother. I would kind of tribe surf with my mother and watch all these commercial films. For me, at that point of time, I was just watching it purely for entertainment, of course. I mean, as we consume entertainment as such, I come from a background from a small town in south of India where we were not thinking anything about sexuality. We were never thinking about anything to do with sex or sexuality. It's not even our mindset. My father basically runs an electronic shop, and that's it. And we are a typical middle class family per se in a small town. But when I came to Mumbai to study, that's when I would say the worldview opened up for me. And when I went to FTII for a film appreciation course. And for me, the one of the first films which was shown there was My Via and Rose, which was a Belgian 1997 film called My Life in Pink, about this young boy who feels like a girl. He has been brought up as a boy, but his inner feeling is of a girl. And that short film per se really changed my perspective because even at that point of time, though I was already in my 26 years old, I didn't have any concept of a non-binary person or a transgender person even then. I was a cis gay man living, and I was not even out then. I mean, I was not even out as a gay man because, in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, everything was so hidden and nobody spoke about homosexuality or being gay at all openly. So I was a late bloomer. I came out in 1999 or something like that. That's not late. Sorry, 1990. I came out in 1990. So for me, it was a very complicated idea to talk about sex and sexuality in the open. So, but since then, I've been seeing a lot of LGBTQ films per se from across the world because I curate the film festival, Kashish Movement, and that's a thing. But my earliest memory would be, as I said, like, I mean, some of these very ultra macho films by Rajkumar, this Kannada actor. Okay. I mean, he's like the typical, I would say, Amitabh Bachchan of the South India. And he would kind of obviously bash up people and but he still had this soft heart, which was nice. He was not the typical, I would say, not the Shatrugna Sinha of the Indian. So he was more of the Amitabh Bachchan of the industry. So for me, that was interesting that he had the soft heart and he was also a singer. He sang beautifully. So that kind of brought out more softness of this person. So he was not the typical male. So I grew up on those kind of films per se. I would, of course, see a lot of Hindi films, which didn't really kind of impact me, but I would kind of, everybody went and saw it and I saw it too. So my earliest LGBTQ film, the first ever film I saw was the film called Strawberries and Chocolates, which was a Cuban film. And that was in Akashvani in Mumbai when there was a film festival. And for me, having a gay film in a mainstream film festival in the 1990s was a discovery. I mean, we
Yes.
just went there to see some of the film, and this happened to be there. And for me, it was like, wow, you actually can see a gay film in a film festival, mainstream film festival. So that was the first ever film. It was a beautiful film. And basically, one person likes chocolate flavored thing, one person likes strawberry flavored thing. And the person who likes strawberry flavored thing is considered a feminine. And the person who likes chocolate is typical, like the yellow and pink or the blue and pink and kind of stuff. So Yeah, that would be my kind of earliest memories of films per se. And since then, of course, I've been making my own films focused on LGBTQ films. My latest film is Evening Shadows, which is about, again, you can see the same thing what we've been talking about. This very toxic masculine father who is a patriarch of the family who wants to suppress any other expression which is beyond his understanding. So his son happens to be gay, and he doesn't want to accept it, of course, in the film. And it's the mother finally who is being subservient because of a dominant patriarchal family setup. She finally revolts against the husband and comes out to defend her gay son. So that film is streaming on Netflix. So for me, films like that would be essential to talk about how we need to kind of take things power away from the toxic masculinity. So you can ask me more questions. That's what I feel.
Yeah, and Sridhar, one of the things would be interesting to know, how can these films become part of, our everyday consumption of media and films? Because again, like Rashmi was saying, you have to look for these films. How do we kind of get them on our OTT platforms? What will make that happen? Because and you can probably also talk a little bit about how, the Hindi film industry, or even, the South Indian film industry, the main, what you call the main, what people watch, how do they handle, I've seen very shoddy handling of gay issues, I've seen very shoddy handling of, trans men or trans women issues. How do you ensure that these things are handled in a more gender sensitive, in a much more, empathetic way, and a way in which it actually, I don't want to use the word normal because you took an exception to it, but how does it normalize acceptance, within this whole, as part of our everyday lives, and not something that is to be secreted or, pushed away. I'd love to kind of, get some of your thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
I think things have changed dramatically, I would say, over the past decade for sure. I would say gone are the days when the effeminate fancy guy used to be the sidekick of the hero who would always make a pass at the hero, gets beaten up or sometimes killed even, or this very butch butch woman who would be the person who would be vying for the girl's attention. And those things have been, at least thankfully, I have passe right now. There's still instances coming up now and then, but primarily that kind of a trope is vanishing at this point of time. So I would say over the last 10 years, we have been seeing more, I would say, not really more empathetic portrayal. I wouldn't say sensitive because there's still a lot more sensitivity needed, but I would say films like uh, 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 Aligarh, or I would say Angry Indian Goddesses, Margaret of the Straw. I mean, you can name many of them per se right now. But everything has happened over the last 10 to 12 years. The earliest person who broke through this whole wall was Onir with Miss
Mm,
My Brother Nikhil, which
yeah, yeah.
definitely was a mainstream attempt because it had mainstream actors, Juhi Chawla and Sanjay Suri. That for
Yes.
me was really broke fresh ground because it was a mainstream film which talked about sexuality very openly.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so we have seen the change per se, but for me also, like as I said, we need to see how do we bring in, as you asked, like how do we bring in these films into the larger mainstream consciousness, which is a
Yeah.
task.
Yeah.
The only way seems to be with the bigger actors. That seems to be the way right now. Only if you have big stars, you are able to kind of navigate and also bring in the big stars. Obviously, does not really mean that like it's going to be ticket sales, but at least it ensures you a bigger marketing promotion budget. So a bigger star equals a bigger marketing budget. And with that marketing budget, you can even push a lousy film wide and far. That's the way it goes. So I think the starting point would be for more actors to be accessible to play LGBTQ characters and without any judgment. Because I remember I was on a show when I think Dostana released, and John
Yeah.
Abraham was asked this question.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
so would you play a gay man again if somebody asked you? So he said like only if the production company is good, only if the director is big, only if he put in so many conditions to that. So I asked, would you ask all these questions if you have to play cop again and again? No,
Yeah.
right? You would play cop again and again, but you would not ask all these conditions to play the cop. But when you kind of want to play a gay character, it's a certain viewpoint because people feel that like the LGBTQ character is something different from the society. So for me, the most important before we come to cinema is to assimilation of the LGBTQ persons within the society. As we said, acceptance by the family, acceptance by friends. For me, that is the most prominent. Only when that happens, when your mother or father does not think you are different, okay, and seeing you on screen is not something different, and that's when I would say more and people would consume LGBTQ films. I still remember, like, I mean, I was showing my film Yours Emotionally in a Delhi college, okay, and this was in 2006 or 7 or something like that, early, and the professor was very concerned because Yours Emotionally was a very in-your-face kind of a film with had sex scenes and kissing scenes between two men, etc., etc. in the film. So he was very concerned, but he told the students saying that, like, you might feel uncomfortable seeing these two Indian men kissing on screen. You can either opt to walk out or sit there and question why you feel uncomfortable. Is it because you have never seen two Indian men kiss on screen? Because the heteronormative film industry has only kind of portrayed men and women together. They've never shown two men together, two women together on the big screen. Is that the reason you feel discomfort? Or is it because within your own homes, you've never seen two men hold hands or kiss each other, or hug each other? I mean, even men and women do not kiss at home, of course, but I'm saying, like, you do not see them even hold each other, So is that the reason? So that has to be normalized, as you say, I accept that word here, definitely. So definitely, like, needs to be the whole idea of LGBTQ people has to be, first of all, brought in and integrated. So for me, we have moved away from tolerance to acceptance right now. But for me, integration is the next step. For me, LGBTQ people has to be integrated. And for us, that's the gatekeepers are primarily the teachers in the colleges, because that's where the first time the student enters there, and if the child is feeling that, like, he or she is not kind of feeling comfortable with the gender assigned, so immediately the peers basically attack that person. That's the reason most of the transgender persons drop out of school.
Right.
So when they attack the teacher, instead of admonishing the person who bullied this person, tells this transgender kid, saying that you should be adhering to the rules of you should be wearing the clothes which are appropriate to your gender. So for me, the sensitization of the teachers is the first thing. And then, of course, sensitization of the family members. And only then we can really talk about how, I would say, films can impact. But as I said, like, I mean, if we have big actors, big budget films, but then sometimes in making something with big actors and big budget films, the whole essence of that whole reality goes away. You kind of either pinkwash it too much, okay, or basically brush it aside under the carpet. Like, I mean, take a very typical case of Kapoor and Sons film.
Yeah.
Nobody even knew who saw the film that, like, actually they were gay. I mean, what is father called? So for me, sometimes you bury it so deep under the carpet, or you pinkwash it so loud, that it both can be put off,
Right. Yeah, I thought Kapoor and Sons actually could have, it was a nice film, and it could have really, put some more attention to it, because, it's such a interesting thing to have that guy as, come out, to his parents, and they could have.
But
really
just to
built
mention
it
this, just to add to this, basically, we at Kashid Film Festival, we get almost 60 Indian LGBTQ films submitted every year.
Okay.
And we program almost 40 Indian LGBTQ films every year. So where
Right.
are these going to be? Apart from the showing at Kashish, how
Right.
do we bring it on so more
Yeah.
and more people can watch it? As Rashmi Lamba said, also
Right.
the festival which Mawa runs is beautiful. There's such
Yeah.
intense conversation which happens when the festival happens there, But how do we kind of take it to a larger audience who would have to watch it by themselves, as you said, instead of basically being asked to watch it? There's a difference, Here at a film festival or at a college screening, you're asked to watch it,
Yeah.
But whereas just supposed to just go and find it and watch it and come back with a comment, that will be a challenge. We are trying to negotiate that with Kashish. We want to start an OTT platform. That's all in the plans right now. But we try to kind of also inculcate developing LGBTQ focused short films. We have a film grant to do that. So I can talk about it later.
And just to, really interested in that, when you're saying you're wanting to start OTT platform, will that be OTT platform specially focused at LGBTQIA films, or all kinds of films? Because again, there is that
That's the
problem
thing.
of, yeah.
That's a problem also. Like, I mean, if I'm starting a LGBTQ focused OTT platform, is basically segregating the entire thing, putting the entire films into a box, and then you are just defeating the purpose. Perhaps I feel the
Yes,
OTT platform, which is a mainstream platform, should have a channel within that platform for
yes,
LGBTQ content. I mean, they do. I mean, like Netflix stacks for most of the films with LGBTQ plus, so that's the thing. So, but like, I would say if it's on, like, I mean, I'm in talks with Disney Hotstar, to curate
right,
a
right,
content of LGBTQ short films, which will be on Disney
right.
Hotstar, which
Yes,
reaches
yes.
millions of people,
Yeah.
and it should be tagged as LGBTQ, not just left in the open, because otherwise people would have to search for it for sure.
Right. Right. No, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And just to kind of sum it up, and I completely agree with you that one of the first places we start is within families. How do we integrate and integrate uh, all kinds of flavors of masculinity also, because it's not homogeneous, right? It's not like one kind of paint is brushed through all of that. So schools is the other one, and we work largely in schools, and we're seeing them that um, how are schools actually handling inherent patriarchal mindsets, how are they doing it, and then the media the media, the systems, the systems within the media, OTT platform, or even cinema halls are largely out of business, but when they come back, and also producers, writers, writers tables, producers, how are they dealing with this kind of an issue? So
Can I just add one thing? As much as we applaud good LGBTQ films, what we need to do is be critical of the bad portrayals. That a lot of
obviously,
us do not do that. We just kind of let it be, let it pass. A film
right,
like Lakshmi Bomb, which is obnoxious. Or this
right,
new Ram Gopal Verma's film, which is I think it's called Girlfriend or something, which is about like really toxic. And really bad portrayal of lesbian couple. For me, we need to be more careful and bash up. I mean, I'm not saying, I know I don't like trolls, but sometimes I think it's good to be a troll if you want to put out bad things. But I would say that, like, I mean, really obnoxious portrayals have to stop. For God's sake, we
yeah.
are in 2021 now.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think one of the large questions for all men and boys out there is that, when you change or you transform, and we see that quite often in the organization that we work, how do you actually also begin to do that with your communities, with your families, with, inside all the spaces that you are in? How can that journey become a me to we journey, so that we actually are building very healthy collectives wherever we go? So that I feel is one of the things that I would like to kind of end today with. And before I end, I'll just kind of want to go around the room asking each of you one question. Do you feel hopeful about what's going to come? How and do how do you personally feel about changing this kind of stuff? Just one sentence, two sentences from all of you, and I'll start with Rajat.
Thank you, Sohini. So I do feel very hopeful. I think anyone who is sort of working in these areas should be hopeful. um, yeah, I'm very optimistic. I think conversations are happening, and I will also say that I'm kind of okay. Sort of, I'm not disregarding this moment where they're not perhaps mainstream yet, because sometimes cult or counterculture opinions carry so much weight that we only see, down the line. So, we should also sort of take a pause and appreciate what we what we have so far, which is quite a lot in my opinion.
Thank you, Rashmi.
Yeah, I too. I think, as I said, the conversations have begun, and I'm hopeful. And I think just a little example of the how do we get to where it's the problem actually lies in the rural or semi-rural areas, because how many people in India, we might say we have a lot of access to internet, but again, there's problems. Like I know the film workshops that we were doing. Mava has a program that they're doing with 3 states. Now we were in Assam, and we were working online with the Assam mentees in Assam, and they actually had to give them the data plan to be able to access for those 2 or 3 days of the workshop. So I know Breakthrough. I was talking. You remember there? I think it's now being used as a hospital, but we do have the mobile cinema Picture Time, and I know that Breakthrough was using it because
Yes.
we were trying to work with the documentary that Sridhar Vibha Bakshi's made called Sunrise, which won the national award. So now Picture Time, I think why I like the technology. So my hope is for the use of technology. I won't make it long, but the very fact that they could have an Akshay Kumar speaking to the rural audience that was watching Toilet Ek Prem Katha or Padman, I think that in itself, if we can use technology to have these conversations with celebrities or, Tapsi Pannu being able to talk to the audience, to the women, I'm very hopeful that, especially that's the good thing about the pandemic, that people have learned how to go online and they are learning how useful that is. So I'm hopeful about the use of technology and greater access to film and media.
Thank you. Sridhar, last
Yeah,
words.
so if I was not hopeful, I would have never been alive till now. So I've always been an optimist per se. I never took the journey which I was supposed to take, from being an engineer to a filmmaker to being an whatever quote unquote activist or festival director. I never thought of any of these journeys. It happened, and I'm glad that it happened. I'm really happy. And I also never thought like Section 377 will go away in my own lifetime. I've been
Yes.
struggling with it for, I'm from a generation which was scarred in our mind right through, because of the
Right.
Section 377 existing.
Right.
And I'm really happy that like it went away. But I'm just hopeful that like we're going to have an anti-discriminatory law in place very soon. That's really crucial. And
Yeah.
next, of course, would be the gay marriage rights, because
Yes.
myself and my partner have been living together for 26 years,
Yeah.
and we are not having any right over each other's property, and
True.
not even right over each other's body. If my partner
Yeah.
falls ill tomorrow, I
Yeah.
can't go and sign in a hospital. You know that? Like, I mean, that's the tragedy. And for me,
Yes.
so for me, gay marriage rights is not just about living as husband and husband or whatever the whole thing, but having right over each other's properties and bodies. For me, that's really crucial, so that I can protect him. We both are protected from each other per se. So I think that's really crucial, and I'm sure like it'll happen very soon. But what we need is basically more and more outcry from not just the LGBTQ community, but allies across board. And that's happening over the last 2 years. I've been seeing a lot more support from all kinds of all quarters, and that really brings me a lot of hope. And thank you for you people also inviting me for this panel. That brings me hope too.
Thank you. Thank you. Lekha, over to you. Are there any, we can, start questions. If there are questions, I'd love to kind of, I can see the chat. So if you can tell me if there are questions and which we could take. Okay, I can see them. I can see them. I can read them out to others. There's a question for Rajat. What do you want boys to know about feminism and patriarchy, and what do they know about these concepts?
Yeah, interesting question. So what do I think boys should know about feminism and patriarchy? I think first of all, they should know that it's not just about women's rights. It's far more inclusive than what they perhaps are assuming it to be. It is a range of movements. It is not just about gender. It sort of even transcends to other problems like race, socioeconomic status. At least in my mind, feminism, the word, unfortunately carries a lot of baggage which is gender related, whereas it is truly a concept which transcends gender into, it is more about equality and parity. So like it that can, so it can also, the same movement addresses other problems, right? Like ageism, like is a very gender agnostic problem sometimes, and can be addressed in this movement. So that's, I think, like one of the things that I would like more boys to learn about, because sometimes mainstream media often, as I said, like inculcates this idea that okay, it is dominated by for women issues, and doesn't really have the space for other people. uh, that's not necessarily true. And yeah, regarding I think like in terms of redefining masculinity part, I kind of want to say that what I have observed is that a lot of times for boys, masculinity is like it's about 90% a show, and there's like a 10% authentic part to it, which either they keep to themselves, or they find you have to cross a certain level of trust threshold for them to, you know, uh, bear witness to that. Uh, I just want, or rather, I hope, like, that ratio starts to move a little bit, uh, where they start feeling more and more comfortable showcasing that authentic 10%, right? And it sort of grows from there, right? Because uh, for me, at least, like a large majority of my early years was in that 90%. And I'm starting to realize that the 10% is far more enjoyable and fulfilling, right? So I might as well rather be there than in the other camp. Yeah.
No, thank you, thank you. And one of the things that and there are some comments on the question rather than questions, and I want to kind of bring a little bit of it back to both Rashmi and Sridhar on how are you seeing the young people of today react to these issues, both with masculinity and both with, with non-binary issues, how are you seeing young people interact with those issues? Rashmi and Sridhar, whoever wants to speak.
So I think, as I mentioned, I think I've been very uh, inspired by the conversations that we've been having at those film festival sessions and recently online. Uh, and I think people are uh, film is a very, very good medium to spark these conversations, because as Sridhar said, what is well done and not done, what is not shown, the good, why is a lot of it not shown, why do we keep showing certain kinds of things in our film and media? uh, but on the other hand, I think again, and of course what I like about it is that a lot of the educators are also present. So the educators are also listening in, because these sessions happen at the schools and colleges in India. Even at a lot of festivals, I think there is opportunity. I was working with a festival in Canada. It's called Hot Docs. It's the second largest film festival for documentaries in the world. And they actually have a section called Docs for Schools. And the filmmakers actually used to never miss that screening, because they used to say that the questions that the children ask are so much more important than just a general how did you shoot and how did you do this and how. And again, as Sridhar and Rajat both said, that the educators are present. So it's percolating down to that. um, so I would say that film and media, and now with so much consumption happening with the youngsters, if we can get the content creators to be more sensitive and with proper representation in the writers' room, and more inclusive and diversity is required, right across, because even if there is a a varied representation in the writer's room, the characters will be different, because it doesn't always have to be the boys cracking jokes. There's another very interesting film which is done by the Representation Project, where Dr. Caroline Hellman is there, and it's how in the writer's room, if it's all male, the conversation and the way they discuss, say, a female body part would be very different from how it would be if there is a female, or the representation of LGBTQI plus people, or ageism. So to me, it's all about content creators being more sensitive and inclusive and diverse, and youngsters questioning a lot more. And as Sridhar said, also pointing out what's not being done right. Why is it not being shown? And I think there, even to my mind, the critics are very important, because that's what is shaping the opinion. So, for example, when Masan was made, you mentioned Udan, Rajat, and so when Masan was made, the very fact that it was, there was no shame when uh, they were showing the male having a sexual encounter with an older woman and then being, arrested, or when he openly cries when he sees the dead body of his fiancée, and he cries. It's okay. So I think that's going to be very important. I don't know, Sridhar can add to that. Sorry.
Yeah,
Thank
I think the younger people are more up to it right now. Like they're basically more understanding of diversity, more accepting of diversity. I would say they're more fluid in their thinking. For me, that's really crucial to talk about fluidity, because I really think if we are stuck in binaries of any sort, we're never going to grow per se. I think the youngsters are more fluid and more accepting, and yeah, but also for me, they're also, I think that a lot of times they're ticking too many boxes. For me, I mean, I know it's very important to diversify and tick each box. Like, I mean, I'm a queer person, I'm an intersex person, I'm a non-binary person, but sometimes they forget in the meantime the overall objective of what we are trying to do. Basically, be more integrated into the mainstream society. For me, that's really crucial at this point of time
Yes.
to bring that
Yes.
up to the youngsters who are maybe listening to this particular thing. Let's be clear about our identities, but let's not be focused only on our identities. Let's be part
Yes.
of a larger a discussion and a larger mainstream, I would say, movement for equality and dignity. And for me, I just want to mention that like we were screening LGBTQ films at Tagore International School in Delhi, and the youngsters there, they were high school children, and they got the film so beautifully. As Rashmi said, they understand it so clearly. They don't need any explanation, and their questions are much more beautiful than the typical festival questions. Oh, what is the budget of the film, and
Yeah,
how did
exactly.
you get to sign this
Yeah.
actress? They're not interested. They get to the point where it really matters, and they really ask those very pertinent questions. So I think the hope definitely is in the youngsters of tomorrow. For me, I just hope they don't get lost in the cyberspace of the social media space per se. I hope they don't get consumed by that, and I hope that like they're also grounded in reality. Most of the youngsters are, but I just hope that like, because I think mental stress issues are really heightening,
Yeah.
not just because of the pandemic,
Yeah.
but basically because of the consumption of media, and also the whole social media consumption is so high, and so a lot of youngsters are basically getting fatigued by that.
Yeah.
For me, that's really a bit of a matter of concern as an person from the previous generation. I just hope that they maintain the mental hygiene per se, and seek counseling if they wish to, or at least talk to somebody on real ground, not just on Facebook or Twitter or something. Talk to people on real ground. It'll definitely be helpful. That's what I just feel.
Yeah, and I have a 17-year-old who's much more up on all of these issues than I am. I'm constantly being corrected, and but the mental health issue is a real challenge, and that leads us to one of the questions that somebody has asked: that should these issues of inclusivity be addressed at school level itself? And if so, do we even have teachers who are equipped to deal with this sensitively? That's a great question, and anyone would, I mean, would anyone of you like to answer that?
Yeah, as I said, like, definitely, I would say any conversation around gender, sex, sexuality should be part of school curriculum. They
Yes.
are in parts in some, but I don't think I would say, I think from 11th standard onwards, I think that's part of the course, but I don't know whether it should be part of the high school course or something. So it should not be basically Kamla ye chahti hai, Raju wo chahta hai. It should change. That basic thing has to change. That
Yeah.
really, like that still is in the textbooks. And
Yeah.
that definitely has to change. That Kamala and Raju, the binaries which have been created, and the whole role models they've been assigned. Raju goes out to work, Kamala cooks in kitchen. That has to definitely change for sure. So
Yeah.
I would say that, like, for me, not just changing the textbook, but I would say changing the mentality of teachers is really primary for me, because they're the gatekeepers, as I already said, and not just in the metro cities, tier 2 and tier 3 cities, as Rashmi said, is really crucial. I would say, to bring in more changes. Yeah, definitely we need more. I would say in the textbook, definitely, but also more sensitization workshop for teachers and faculty, admin faculty, and everybody, all the schools.
I was actually talking to Christina when we were discussing this, that to me, parents are so crucial as well, because, but it could be a beautiful blend. I was telling her that, for example, the PTA meetings in schools, the parent-teacher meetings, don't have to be about discussing the child's marks, for God's sake. We can have so many workshops. When my kids were little, I was very actively involved with the PTA, and I was chairperson of their PTA for 3 years. And we did some great workshops. For example, as Sridhar said, just to give you an example of one of the workshops that we did, we used to have these your child and you workshops for the parents, but also attended by teachers, but something as simple as living in a joint family, which is what Nutcut is dealing with. Nutcut, the film, deals with what do you do in a joint family, whether it's about discipline, whether it's about patriarchy, whether it's about whatever we're talking about. So, why can't we use forums like that? And as Sridhar said, in real talking to each other, not necessarily, okay, once we are all back into whether it's a new normal or a normal. Just a small example, I remember I went up onto stage and said, you know what, I never came first in class ever. I haven't ever topped my class. But I know I've been put into very strange situations in my life script. I've gone to the back of the beyond of Bihar, right up to Canada. And I'm not I've used my education wherever I've gone. And that education can include these values as well, which I think we can have a homogeneous conversation. And if we need to show short films to spark those conversations, I think it would be very helpful. Or even, I think, as we were saying, you said Disney's changed their characters, right? I think there's this gorgeous thing called the Detective Princess, which is the Indian princess who's a detective. I don't know if I've got the name of it right, the film, but I know the Gina Davis Institute kept putting links to it, and I would keep seeing all the links, and I was so excited because she's dressed in Rajasthani attire, and she's the one who goes and chases the robbers, and she's the detective. Now, just that subtle, just a subtle change in the character that you don't even have to preach, but there's such, and they're using Bollywood dance forms, etc., and mixing real life. And I'll get you the name. I'll find the name and send it to you. But it's a beautiful series on Disney. So I think small things like that, small changes.
Yeah, I know. And we at Breakthrough, we have now partnered with the Punjab government to actually look at syllabuses of classes 6, 7, and 8 and bring in the gender lens into that, and SCRT has just signed off on our curriculum. So we next hope to train the teachers. So I think schools are really, really important to actually, create foundations of all of these kind of things, which can be then carried over at homes and communities. So thank you very much, everyone. This has been just absolutely fantastic, and I'll come back to you all on with some questions I have myself and some projects that I'm working on. So yeah, great conversation, and I'm handing it back to Lekha to actually take it forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Sohini.
Thanks. It was a great discussion. Thank you.
Rich conversations like these are so important, not just in terms of content, but also as examples of a dialogue of various experiences and perspectives. Conversation on gender, sexuality, representation, inclusivity in all their complexity and diversity are so essential. And it is essential to keep having these conversations and come at it from as many sides as possible as we did tonight. Thank you, Rashmi, Sridhar, Rajat, and Sohini for the work that you do, for taking the time to have this conversation for all our benefit, for stoking the fire and keeping it going. Work that Project Raise and Equal Community Foundation does so well. Thank you, Christina Furtado, the woman behind it all, for putting this session together and for driving this series. Lastly, thank you, audiences, for joining us tonight, and good night, and see you next time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you.
Christina. Bye.